The goal of this podcast is to highlight the journey and motivations of founders of tech startups that saw some sort of gap in the market and had an aha moment, as well as the guts to take the initiative to fill it. In today's podcast, we're joined by John Hack, who is the co founder and chief technology officer of Interflexion. This is a company focused on using AI driven interactive role play to enhance conversational performance in the workplace. Now, AI is certainly one of those hot topics these days, but John's been in this industry for many years. So I'm looking forward to getting his perspective on the current state of AI and how his company Interflexion is leveraging it. Before founding Interflexion in 2019, John had a diverse career that included work in natural language processing, data visualization, and predictive analytics. He holds a bachelor's degree from MIT, a master's from NYU, and has earned 3 patents. Now, I like to call John an OG when it comes to AI. He's an original gangster. This topic is not new to him. So, John, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here, John. Looking forward to the conversation.
So, John, let's start out by describing your career in AI and how it all got started.
Sure. I was interested in an academic career, went to MIT, and realized a real love for computers along the way. I studied linguistics, artificial intelligence, computers, economics, and math. So I have a broad base there. And my first job was working in the natural language processing research and development group at Wang Laboratories in Lowell, Massachusetts,
Wow,
back
Wang.
in the
I
early
remember
80s.
Wang. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were working with a memory space of 64K, so there wasn't really a lot of opportunity for doing large-scale AI at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so my career shifted more into network business systems with a strong emphasis on analytics.
Okay.
So, and throughout that, shifting between innovation labs in large corporations and startup environments. So did a couple of startups out in California after graduation.
Mm-hmm.
One focused on data visualization, the other one with networked printing technology, and then ended up on the East Coast and doing analytics on Wall Street. Got my master's and went into consulting. I met a gentleman there named John Muldoon, who was building out one of the first fintechs, and he's part of this story. After the dot-com collapse, I joined a startup that was doing sales analytics, and then another one that was doing corporate performance management, planning, execution, and looking for the variances and why they didn't accomplish things. We were successful, acquired by SAP, where I ran the Performance Management Innovation Lab for a number of years. During my time at the SAP Performance Management Innovation Lab, we researched the real drivers of performance in organizations. And more it became clear that it was about people and how they're organized, how well they're trained, and getting the best out of everyone.
So it looks like your career had this intersection between natural language processing, which was the early days of AI, and this thing about performance management and the qualitative skills and interpersonal skills that sort of people need. So it's an interesting use of this technology in that intersection. So the question that I would have, John, is, so what motivated you to start Interflexion?
One of the more interesting projects we undertook was working with the San Francisco 49ers to put their player performance analysis into a more rigorous and online system. And what stood out for me was not just that they captured a lot of data, which of course they do, but the degree to which they focused on interpersonal skills, leadership, communication, collaboration, and so forth when they're evaluating talent. And realizing that so-called soft skills are in fact essential to putting those hard skills to work. And a few years After that, uh, John Muldoon, who I had worked with in the 90s, had reached out to me because he was advising startups, and he would reach out on a regular basis with questions about technology.
Yep.
And a client was attempting to use their VR technology for corporate education.
So that's virtual
And
reality, right?
yes, virtual reality, headsets, really immersive, emotionally powerful, sticky experiences. And they wanted to use this VR to train people in interpersonal communication in the workplace. And we came away from that experience after advising them with the belief that it was the conversational analysis more than the visual experience that was going to be essential for this to be successful. And that was our aha moment.
Mm.
We were literally, in the car, stuck in traffic in the Bronx, trying to get back to New Jersey, talking about, what was going to be necessary for soft skills development at scale. And we knew that human coaches were the gold standard. That's what everyone wanted,
Right.
but very few could afford. If we could have an AI coach that could scale to the entire organization so that everyone would be able to get that kind of guidance, we thought that would really make the workplace a more productive and harmonious place.
So this was 2019, right?
This was 2019, yeah,
So what
January.
yeah, so what made you think the technologies were ready to be able to do that?
I got my initial experience with natural language processing in the era of symbolic analysis
Okay.
and trying to, use deterministic algorithms to parse language and strip uh, text from audio tracks. And it wasn't successful, to put it bluntly, at that time. Machine learning in the early 2000s had some significant successes with speech to text and creating syntax from that text. And we got the sense that natural language processing was about to cross that, minimum viable threshold
Mm-hmm.
where it could be used in applications in the real world and not just in the laboratory. So we knew it wasn't quite there yet in 2019, but we saw that it was getting close enough that it was time for someone to start building apps with that technology so that when it matured, we would be ready with a solution.
Yeah, so that's sort of was it Gretzky? He talked about skate to where you think the puck's going to be. So you had to start then,
That's
even
right.
though you thought things may not have been quite ready yet, right?
That's right. That's
Mhm.
right. And I think, what we've seen over the last, what has it been, about 20 months since ChatGPT caught the world by surprise. I think we were right. The timing and how quickly it accelerated from not quite ready for prime time to ready for prime time was a surprise, I think, to everyone, even the folks at ChatGPT.
Yeah, and we're going to get to the
Yeah,
LLMs and generative AI and how all that fits into what you're doing. I remember around the 2019, 2020 timeframe, in my job, I started to see a lot of transcription, automatic transcription
right.
coming onto the market. And the one application with that was closed captioning and then language translation. So I can see how there was a baseline for being able to, at least if someone were to speak something, maybe I could feed that into some sort of engine to do analysis and then give them feedback, right? So I guess that was
That's
your
right.
thinking.
Yeah, and those were the things that we were seeing in the market and in the research, and it excited us about the possibilities of doing something uh, with it that had value in the workplace.
So it sounds like interflexion. How did that name come about, interflexion?
So what we envisioned was an app that you could role play workplace situations. You could be, in a sales call with a prospect, or giving feedback to an employee, or having a difficult conversation with a peer.
Mhm.
And the AI would analyze your conversation and give you immediate feedback on how you could be better, and allow you to work through these different workplace scenarios with the guidance of this AI. And so we saw it as being interactive
Mhm.
and giving you an opportunity for reflection on your own
Mhm.
performance. So that was the genesis of the name Interflexion.
That
You
makes
interact
sense.
and
Yeah.
reflect. Yeah,
Interact and reflect. That's great. And I think the other technology off the shelf that was available was the cell phone, right? And the ability to
Ab-
people's thing doing selfies and things like that, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And we also wanted it to be something people could use anywhere, anytime. It's very difficult when you're stuck to the desktop to to prepare for conversations, especially if your time to focus on developing yourself is, say, weekends or evenings.
Right. So it sounds like you've developed this coach. I call it a coach in a pocket, in your pocket, right? Where you can
Yeah,
just pull it out and immediately be able to practice interpersonal and communication skills. So can you walk me a little bit through what that application looks like to a user? You know, I've got my phone. What happens? What do I do?
so you're presented with stories. It could be uh, someone who works for you who's struggling to get a peer to finish his work, and she comes to you for help, and she tells you he's not doing his work. I need this to get my project done. Can you tell him to go, get his work done? And what you want is for that young manager to take a coaching approach rather than a I'll get it done myself approach. And that's the biggest mind shift of anyone going from individual contributor to effective manager. So you have to respond to her in your natural voice, as if you're on a FaceTime call
Mhm.
with her or a Zoom call with her, and tell her, how to deal with the situation. And the application analyzes what you say right in real time, and it looks, are you taking the right perspective on this challenge? Are you conveying useful ideas that will help her? And then are you asking her to take responsibility for the next steps rather than just telling her what to do? So if you do those things, you get good marks, and then you have an opportunity to have the guy come into your office and complain to you about Jackie. But if you get it wrong, it tells you exactly what you need to be better
Mm.
and gives you an opportunity to practice again, to look at yourself, so you can review the video of yourself talking on the phone. And that's where, the reflection and the interaction lead to improved performance.
Okay, so I see. So I'm presented with a situation by someone on video, right? So
Yeah,
it's set up via video, and then I'm prompted to respond the best way that I can to that video. And then given the technology that's now available to take that and transcribe it to text, it's fed into some sort of engine that analyzes my response and then scores me on it. Do I have that right?
that's right.
Okay. And then I have the opportunity to do it again.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the iterative feedback. Oh, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool. So so I can imagine from an individual perspective, that's great. Are there advantages now if an organization rolls this out? Are there reports where I can tell, how folks' skill levels are getting to a baseline?
Absolutely. And probably the best way to illustrate this is with an actual customer that is using it in this way. University of North Carolina uses our app as homework in a course on organizational ethics.
Mm.
And students are given the opportunity to work through realistic ethical dilemmas in the workplace after having been formally trained in how do you handle ethical issues in the workplace. And they're not the big picture, do we outsource to a country where labor laws aren't good. They're the kind of meat and potato stories. An underperforming colleague, what do you do with them?
Right.
Uh, you're your partner in the project wants to misrepresent project status to the client because they know you're going to get ahead again in a couple of weeks, and why make things more difficult. And so what we found, and the professor and I had some hypotheses going in, that the students know what's right and what's wrong. The goal of an ethics course isn't to teach right from wrong. It's to teach how do you handle a situation where there's an ethical dilemma. And one of the things we found was that students were very quick to do the right thing, but they struggled to maintain good relationships with the people that they were in conflict with. So it gave the professor an opportunity to focus more in the classroom on effective means of resolving conflict while maintaining good relations with your coworkers, and spending less time on what's right and what's wrong, because that people know that. And so we could see that in the data, and it allowed him to adjust the classroom focus to be more towards the things that students needed to be effective.
Okay, got it. So you can sort of program in there and leverage AI to rate what those responses look like. Now, I've played with, now I know we talked about this coming out in 2019, and we know what happened in November of 2022. Generative AI came to the market, and I've been playing with this chat GPT thing now for a while, and I've been doing role-playing interviews, objection handling, and I'm able to speak to this generative AI engine. Are there advantages or disadvantages to that approach versus what Interflection's doing?
So they do different things.
Okay.
Although there is a lot of overlap in terms of, you can set up a chat GPT, say, hey, coach me on, giving feedback to my employees. And you can even put it in voice mode, and
Right.
it'll role play. However, for an organization that's looking to improve their people, there are three reasons why we think what we're doing is a value add beyond what the generative AIs out of the box can do. The first is that, and we'll talk about the technology a little bit later in more detail,
Yep.
but we are a hybrid system that includes the large language models, but also has symbolic logic in there, in particular around the way you structure how it evaluates people's performance. So in many organizations, it might be, whether it's ethical dilemmas or the way that managers are expected to interact with their employees, those rules are visible and configurable, so that if there's a question about what are people being taught, what is the AI coming back with as feedback in our system, you have complete control over that. The AI is never going to come back with something completely unexpected, inappropriate, out of bounds, or so forth, because that's all auditable and configurable.
So it's very transparent in how it's operating, where my understanding of a generic chat GPT large language model is trained on this mass amount of data, so you never really know what the algorithm is using to rate, say, a
That's right.
response. Right.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And that we know that in many corporate environments, that's important.
Yeah.
The second thing is consistency. Because it's configured, it can help ensure that you have consistency in the way that people are being guided in their development. We have a company that is a roll-up of many regional companies, and the sales teams were talking about their products and services in different ways. So this is a way to get nationwide the sales team to be consistent with branded messaging, with product and service features and pricing and so forth. And that consistency across the organization. It's not that everyone has to parrot. By the way, I just want to make it really clear here. You're allowed to use your own language to a large degree. You don't have to. This is not like keyword based. You have to
Right. Get
verbatim
these words.
memorize
Yeah.
things, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can absolutely use whatever language you want to use, and regional variations in language are perfectly acceptable. However, there are things that they want, in terms of pricing or product features. These are the things we focus on. These are the things we don't talk about unless we're pressed to the wall, and so forth. And in some environments, there are things we cannot talk about. In some regulated environments like
Oh
pharmaceuticals,
yeah, I was
where
about to say pharmaceutical.
right,
There's a certain things you can and cannot say. Absolutely.
right, and it will watch for those things you can't say. If you don't say them, the software just says, "Hey, good job,"
Right.
overall. But if you say them, it highlights exactly what you said that you shouldn't say, and can advise you on what to say instead. So that's an important piece of it. That consistency across the organization in the way that people are being coached in interpersonal skills. And then
No, I was just going to say. So if you contrast that with ChatGPT, we know that those who understand how that large language model works, it's predictive, right? It's just predicting that
yeah,
next word, and you got that little regenerate button. So if you hit that, your answer is slightly different every time, and especially in a
yeah,
regulated environment like pharma and even real estate now, there's things you can say and can't say as an agent. You don't want
right,
that latitude,
right.
right?
Yeah. And in our system, if you give it the same input, you will always get the same output.
Yeah.
And that's, like I said, that is valued by many. And the last, and I think, by no means the least, is the analytics. I was describing, what we learned with the class at the university I was describing what we learned in the class on ethical dilemmas in the workplace. That kind of analysis can apply broadly within your organization. You can identify, you know, which key components of conversation people are struggling with. Like, how are people doing on active listening? Right? Often in organizations, people are very good with the technical stuff and they struggle with active listening, right? Knowing that and identifying who could use more help and who's ready to move to the next level is super useful. And those kinds of analytics are not going to be available in a chat GPT type environment where you're looking to compare apples to apples
Right.
in how people are being given feedback and how they're reacting to that feedback and so forth.
So this is really about being able to really define what your desired outcomes
Perf-
are of that training and then be able to report
right.
on it organizationally.
Yeah, it's a performance based
Yeah.
approach. This is what good performance looks like, and now you have an opportunity to practice to get to that level of performance, and it guides you in that direction.
Now you also have some background on how people best learn, right? So how does interflexion reinforce, how a typical person would learn?
I like to make the analogy to learning to hit a ball.
Hmm.
You can go onto YouTube and watch all the videos about hitting a ball, but it's a totally different thing to go out there and actually take a swing.
Right.
And, this is about getting out there and taking a swing and having a coach point out to you, hey, you need to fix your stance in this way. You need to adjust your grip over here, and you need to follow through on your swing. And having that kind of guidance takes people from the abstract knowledge of, how to handle a report of sexual harassment to actually talking through the conversation with someone in practice in
Hmm.
a safe environment where you can make mistakes and no one will care, so that when you actually are faced with that situation in the workplace, you've got enough practice that you are much more likely to be effective and to handle the situation appropriately.
Got it. Now, I know one of the things we talk about is the journey of being a founder and some of the challenges. operationally. I'm curious,
Yeah.
given that you have so much experience with AI over the years and the acceleration of AI these days, are you finding uses not so much in just the application, but how you operate and continue to drive forward Interflexion in general?
Sure. And I'm going to take a moment and kind of talk in a couple of different areas
Okay.
about this, John, because this is the explosion of AI in the last 20 months has just been an amazing experience for those of us who've been working in it for
Yeah, I can
through the
imagine.
long AI
Right.
winter of the 80s and 90s and all of that. So um, first is just as an aside, the pandemic. By the way, I do not recommend announcing your product in market 2 weeks before a pandemic shuts the country down. Uh, but it did accelerate some of the trends that we knew would be important for our solution. Primarily, the notion that remote training and remote work are an integral part of economic activity. And that was a benefit in the long run, although the distractions that HR and learning and development groups were going through as they coped with all of the craziness of 2020
Yeah.
certainly made life difficult. When uh, generative AI really came into the public consciousness in 2023, it gave us a lot more legitimacy in the eyes of our target market
Hmm.
because they were hearing not just from us, but from the press and their colleagues and their executive management that AI was something that could contain value and should be looked at. At the same time, having a lot more of this technology in the market means we have to be more clear about how we differentiate
Yeah.
and where we play. So, in terms of how our product has been brought to market, I'd say the net has been very positive. And it's also, hey, one thing founders do know is if you have no competition, it may be because you have no value. If you have, if if you have competition, it means that there's a market here that's worth going after. So that's how we look at it. Now to answer the other part of your question, we definitely use AI within our own company, and not just our own product, but the generative AI tools.
Yeah.
And I think that they're, like, if you look back, and I'm a student of the history of technology. If you look back at like the introduction of electricity and how long it took electricity to really show up in the productivity statistics, it, and I won't bore you with the details here, I promise. So it takes a while for new technologies, especially dramatically new technologies, to become adopted because people have to figure out how to fit them into existing processes, how they fit within a regulatory regime, and so forth. You cannot replace a person with AI. That's not happening.
Right.
That's a myth. But what we're seeing is that AI can take on tasks that people do, and that means that you are at risk. And I think John, you're the one who told me this. You might be replaced by a person who knows how to use
That's right.
AI.
Yep.
Um, but it also means that you can amplify your productivity by using these generative tools. Um,
I like that term, amplified productivity. It's like when we went from slide rules to calculators, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. For those of you out there who still remember that transition,
I was on the cusp.
let me give you a couple of quick examples. One from our company and one from a person I know who works in marketing. We use it in software development.
Mm.
We don't have the AI, we use Copilot,
Hmm.
write the code. But it is super useful for debugging and quality assurance. We can ask it to analyze code that, you know, maybe someone hasn't looked at it in a couple of years and we're like, what's this code doing again?
Right.
It does a really good job of summarizing code. If you want to get something new written, it's going to get it wrong, but it can set you in the right direction. Uh, I actually think that it is more valuable as an educational tool than it is as a productivity tool per se.
Mm.
So if you're getting into a new language or a new, let's say you know JavaScript, but now you have to start mastering Express and Node, right? It can help you get there faster. It's not going to be the senior developer that you want it to be, but it will help your people move from junior to senior developer more quickly. And I think that's a big part of its value. You can also use it to document code.
Hmm.
I actually had a I had it documenting some code, and it not only made fun of the fact that some of the code had been done in a certain way, but it basically teased the developer about, like, why would you do that? Like, can you justify to me, the AI, why you would write code this way?
Yeah.
And I got a good laugh out of it because it wasn't my code, but um, it's interesting how good it can be at identifying issues that need to be addressed in the code.
Yeah, I think it accelerates and amplifies. So even,
Yeah,
and I shared this with you in preparing for this podcast. I went
that's
to
right.
Chat GPT and I said, "Well, tell me everything you know about John Hack," and it basically came up with your bio that was, I would say, 98% accurate, which is an improvement over past versions. But
Yes.
it certainly helped me to accelerate preparing, for this. I even can get suggestions on questions to ask and how I title it, and so it's a great brainstorming application as well.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something really important there. There was a study done on productivity using AI in the workplace. And one of the things they discovered is that it benefits underperformers more than it benefits strong performers. And I think the reason for that finding was that underperformers find it harder to go from nothing to having something on paper to
Yeah.
work with. That first draft, writer's block issue. I think AI is super helpful in overcoming that writer's block and getting people started on a project in the right direction. And uh, I use it for first drafts of a number of things. I never send it out without editing,
Oh yeah.
uh, and so forth. And, like I mentioned, this marketing executive I know uses it for summarizing uh, consumer interviews. They have all the transcripts, they have all the recordings, but writing that first summary that they go through and then edit, it cuts a
Yeah.
half a day out of
Yeah.
the job, and it's not a quality issue. It's simply a matter of, it's tedious to create that first draft.
Yeah. So given that you have so much history, John, leading up to now and seeing what's happening now, where do you think, and these are questions that no one really knows the answers, but I'm interested
Right.
in your opinion. Where do you see this technology evolving to? What should we be cautious about? And then what should we be excited about?
And I'm going to start answering that by talking about how we got here a
Okay.
little bit,
Yeah.
because I think that's an important background. It's
Context
not
is
like,
important, right?
context is very important. And this technology didn't just spring out of nowhere, a couple of years ago, right? So the first generation AI, which is where I got started, was symbolic. If we have enough rules, we can figure out how the world works and represent that world and the interactions of the objects and agents within that world. And there was a lot of really interesting work done to model tabletops of geometric objects, to create conversational AI. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a program called ELIZA, which everyone should play with sometime to recognize what state of the art looked like then. And it's better than you would think using just keywords. And so those ran into some severe limitations.
Now, was the best version of what you're talking about Watson on Jeopardy?
Watson is a really good example of like how far you could take something like that.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's a great example. I was also going to use expert systems, all of those configurators at, when you went to order a Dell machine.
Right. Yeah.
Right. All of those kinds of technologies where a set of rules could be applied to solve the problem. But there were some very difficult problems that couldn't be solved by rules, including speech to text. I won't get into the details there, but it's an amazingly hard problem. And your brain does some incredible things in order to do that. And it took the development of the second generation of AI, which is machine learning, to solve those problems. And I'm not going to try and give a tutorial on machine learning here.
We'll be here for a couple hours.
We would be here for a while, yes.
At least.
What it comes down to is you have large data sets and you look for statistical relationships within that data. And you use those statistical relationships to predict whether, that image is of a cat or not, whether the next most likely word in this sentence is this or that, and so forth. And so when you put a prompt into ChatGPT, it basically is coming back with a set of statistical predictions as to what the next most likely words will be, and it just generates those in that way. And that worked great for solving problems like image recognition and speech to text. And that's how we got to where we are today. We've got these, generation 1 and generation 2. So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Couple of things I think are important to recognize. One is that machine learning also has severe limitations. And I know this is controversial, and you can listen to people who are more academic and more in the weeds argue about that on the internet. I do believe, though, pretty strongly that we are already seeing diminishing returns from the large language models in terms of their ability to mimic human intelligence. And that will continue to be the case. They do not have a representation of the world. They cannot imagine things outside of their training set.
Right.
And, so for, truly creative endeavors, or for, imagining what could happen if something were to change, right? It's not going to be able to say, actually, there was a professor at MIT, and I forget her name off the top of my head. This idea that a person does not need to drive a car into a wall 100 times to learn that it's a bad idea. We actually need 0.
Right. There's some reasoning.
Data points.
So is it a shortage or a lack of the ability to reason?
Yes, but it's reasoning at more than just a mathematical level. It's a reasoning at, there are objects in the world and there are agents in the world. There's this person named John Seaton, and John Seaton has motivations, and he has needs, and he has aspirations, and those drive his behavior, and we can extrapolate from those things what John might do in a certain situation. And, we know that if something is balanced precariously, we can sense that it's balanced precariously, and we can imagine what would happen if it were to fall one way or the other. And those kinds of real world, I like to think of it as an embodied intelligence. Those are severe limitations, right? ChatGPT has no idea what it's talking about. It's just giving you a string of words based on statistical relationships. And it does an amazingly good job of that. But there's a reason why it gets called mansplaining as a service. And that's because it's all conventional wisdom presented in a confident voice
Right.
that's often wrong.
Right.
So where do we go from here? I think one is, continued improvements in those models. The second is the third generation of hybrid AI. If you look at human intelligence, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in artificial intelligence to spend some time studying human intelligence, because it is what we're shooting for,
Right.
allegedly, and understanding it more deeply is useful. And one of the things that's true about human intelligence is that it's not a thing. It is many things. And, I've often, I think it was Steven Pinker who called language a contraption. We took other skills that we had and cobbled them together into this skill we call language. But it's not one thing. Taking sound and converting it into words is itself an amazingly difficult thing to do. Once we have words, we can then recombine them in different ways to create new meanings.
Right.
And that's symbolic manipulation. Whereas the speech to text is, and I'm oversimplifying, a machine learning algorithm.
Right.
So by combining machine learning models, and not just for language, but for other things as well, image recognition and so forth, with these symbolic systems that understand how the world works and can extrapolate and not just statistically, but knowing how things work in the world, then that's something to look for. And I think, that's what we've built. And I think you'll see other applications. And I think if you look carefully at what ChatGPT, at OpenAI, what Meta and Google are doing, you dig under the hood a little bit there and you'll see that they are already moving into hybrid systems where they've got multiple layers of AIs that are performing different tasks within the overall.
Right. Rather than this internet big 175 billion parameter thing where there's no specific expertise and, like you said, no transparency on how it's really working, of being able to plug in some, I don't know what you call it, data, or I don't want to say knowledge, but trying to make your outputs a lot more predictable based on a subset of data.
That's exactly right. And if I don't know if you remember when Bing first came out. Do you remember Stanley?
I don't.
Stanley was the underlying model for Bing, and Stanley didn't. There was a filter that was created because Microsoft remembered, and I'm probably getting too much in the weeds here. Microsoft experiment with Tay back
in 2016.
Yeah, where it
got kind of racist.
Yeah, hey, we're going to put a Twitter bot out there and it'll learn and take on the personality of the internet, and it became a Nazi in like a day. So they pulled it. So Stanley was the raw model.
Oh, okay.
And somebody discovered how to, through prompt engineering, cut underneath the Bing personality, which had been layered on top of Stanley, and talk to Stanley directly. And it did not go well. There was a lot more raw sewage in the data set down there. And so you're already seeing the recognition that you can't just have a large model and directly interact with it and expect good results. You have to layer it with other things. They could be symbolic, they might be additional other, complementary languages. And you need some kind of orchestration layer on top of all of that, sort of like the executive function in the cerebral cortex, where you're, somebody here should be in control and managing who gets, the most.
Manage your urges and
Yes,
instincts, right? Yeah.
exactly.
You need
So
guardrails. Yeah.
absolutely, you need guardrails. And one of the ways that I think these things will be adapted is you will see more application specific AI.
Yeah.
So, ChatGPT is, and I use that generically, Bing,
Yeah. Llama,
Gemini,
all those
all of
guys.
them, right?
Yep.
Claude, I like Claude. Uh, they're great, but having an AI that's specifically tuned to a need, such as helping people develop their interpersonal and
Hmm.
communication skills, or monitoring aircraft part wear, or whatever it might be, those are the kinds of applications that we're going to see a lot more of. AI embedded in things, AI taking on specific tasks or subsets of tasks rather than the HAL 9000s that run the whole
Right.
thing,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah. I've seen that, John, right? And I heard someone quoted this saying that, yeah, there's a lot of really good demos now, right? But
yeah.
most of those demos aren't a production rather application. And so it's going to be up to companies like Interflexion to take those capabilities, put a wrapper around it that's consumable for, driving a specific output.
Yeah, and this is nothing new in the American economy.
Yeah.
You go back to, whether it's the canal building craze of the 1830s or the fact that there were almost 400 car companies in the early
Right.
1900s. There is always this flourishing of experimentation around these new technologies. And then, as the best or most useful emerge, the others are either absorbed or fall by the wayside. And that's, this is that flowering. And we saw it with the .com era,
Yeah.
right? This is the flowering of all of these different possibilities. And the market will, help sort out what's really useful and, what's a cool demo.
Yeah. We can get into a whole conversation about monetization because to me, it's like an arms
Yeah.
race right now where, the large companies like the Googles, the Microsofts, et cetera, investing billions and billions and billions of dollars into this. And, even the street is looking, well, okay, what's the payoff? How will this be monetized? Versus if one doesn't do it and the other one does it, then you're left behind just in terms of features and capabilities you're able to offer. So it's almost like you have to make the investment in it. Right.
Yeah, and if you look at, say, the development of broadband in the
Yeah.
U.S. and the huge build out of fiber in the 1990s, MCI didn't survive to benefit from all of the investment that they made
Yeah.
in
Some
fiber,
fall by the wayside because of it.
right? But that investment in fiber is what allowed us to shift to a virtual office environment on a dime when coronavirus hit.
Right.
So the benefit was there. It's just a question of, when and whom and how much, not whether this will be valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. I'm going to throw you a question from left field. We hadn't talked about this at all. And it's okay to say, well, I have no idea. Quantum computing. So we had CPUs, and then obviously the GPUs allow the computations required around AI to be a much more effective and possible. You have any thoughts on quantum computing at all and how that fits into this whole thing?
I am not an expert in
That's
quantum
fine.
computing, but I do want, nonetheless, that, and with that caveat, I just want to share a couple of thoughts.
Okay.
There are technologies that show great promise, but take a very long time
Yeah.
to come to fruition. And I think quantum computing and nuclear fusion, for power generation,
Mm-hmm.
these are technologies that should work in theory, but have tremendous engineering challenges to be overcome for them to really become practical.
Yeah.
The temperature at
The
which
cooling. Yeah.
quantum computers operate, for example, it, you know it. So those are some real. And the second is that the kinds of problems they solve are amazingly hard to solve with the computers we have today. and they will become huge game changers if they ever
Yeah.
come into play.
Yeah.
Um,
It could
so
be another inflection point if
uh,
those problems get solved, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
But from what I've read, there are some engineering breakthroughs that are going to be required, and there's no clear path to those at this time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know,
Got it. So, John, this has been I can talk to you all day about technology and trends and things that are happening. If people want to find out more information about interflexion, what should they do?
well, they can do a couple things. Our website, there's a contact form, interflexion.com with an X, and you can ask for more info there. You can reach out to me directly, uh, john.hack, that is my real name, at interflexion.com.
It's a good programmer
And
and last name, right?
I have heard the jokes for over 50 years. Those are two great ways to get in touch with us right now.
Great. So, part of this reason for this podcast is all about, the journey as a tech founder. What advice other than starting your company during a pandemic would you give to others out there thinking about starting their own tech company?
Here are a few pieces of advice in no particular order and not numbered. First is fall in love with the problem rather than your solution. That will guide you through any pivots or any hard
I
times.
like that. I like that. Yeah.
Um, Second is to be as attentive to your path to market. Product market fit is a great thing, but unless you can actually reach that market with your product, and that means knowing who your buyer is within an organization and knowing what messaging your buyer actually will respond to and having a way to get that message to them, those are as important as having a great product. And that's it's worth spending the time, and there are no shortcuts in my experience on that.
So your go-to market's important.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds obvious when
Right.
you say it that way,
Yeah.
John, but it's very easy. We remember the products that come out of nowhere, and ChatGPT is a perfect example. They did not expect it to be as successful as it was, but they had years of releasing
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
models before they did that. They didn't just come up with that as that was not their first foray.
Mm-hmm.
They spent years before they unlocked that. And it's going to take, and I think that's the third thing I would say, is it's going to take longer than you think. A founder I knew, who I think the way he put it is, it took me 15 years to become an overnight
That's right.
success.
Yeah. It's the tip
Right?
of the iceberg thing, right? All that work that was done over the years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and if you love solving this problem,
Mm-hmm.
and you're willing to take the time to come up with a great solution, to find your path to market, and then to stick through it, it can be a tremendous amount of fun. And if you're not having fun along the way, it and it may sound crazy because the press always likes to talk about the money. Most entrepreneurs, most founders, most innovators do not get fabulously wealthy.
Right.
They have good lives. But if you're doing it for the money, I would say go to Wall Street.
Yeah.
That's where the money is.
So your answer is very similar to the first founder I had on, right? Was have fun. I think the
Yeah.
insight on don't fall in love with the solution, fall in love with the problem. Like you guys were looking at VR at first, and then you had this aha moment. oh, I think we can solve this problem with a different solution
Yeah,
set. And the solution sets will always evolve, right? As new technology comes
absolutely.
about. So I think focusing on the problem, what that gap in the market that you're trying to solve is key. And yeah, you can't forget selling. You got to sell it. You got to
Yeah,
monetize it, right? So go to market
right,
for it.
right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, John, I
So,
really want to thank you for this conversation. Talking about AI and how tech can be used for coaching and improving interpersonal and communication skills, and understanding that evolution in technology for someone who's been in AI for longer than most, right? So you have the contextual
yes,
view of where things are, and then that contextual view gives you the knowledge to say, okay, this is why this approach may be better than this newfangled toy that's out there. But as technology evolves, interflexion, I imagine, will evolve, along with that.
absolutely.
So thanks again for joining. The insight was fantastic, and can't wait to talk to you again.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you to the audience for listening, and hopefully you got a lot out of this. And John, I look forward to the next time we talk, uh, on camera or off.
All right, sounds good. All right, take care, everybody.
Thanks.